It was late at night. The streets were quiet. A soft wind moved the empty signs outside a small gas station on the edge of the city. Inside, a young black man in a clean military uniform walked slowly to the counter. He looked tired, but calm. "Just this water," he said softly, placing the bottle in front of the cashier. The cashier, a middle-aged woman, looked up and smiled. "Long day?" she asked. The man nodded. "Yeah, just got back from a base 3 hours ago. Wanted a drink before heading home." She scanned the bottle. "Thank you for your service." He gave a small smile. "Appreciate it." He paid, nodded, politely, and walked out. But as soon as he stepped outside, the quiet night changed. 2 police cars sped into the parking lot and blocked his path. Their tires screeched as they stopped. The doors flew open, and 4 police officers jumped out, with flashlights and shouting voices. "Hands where I can see them!" one officer yelled. The man froze, confused. "What's going on? Get on the ground!" another shouted, pulling out his gun. The man raised his hands slowly. "I didn't do anything, I'm just leaving." But the officers didn't listen. They rushed toward him, grabbed his arms, and forced him to the ground. His face hit the cold concrete. His military hat rolled away. A few people near the gas station saw the scene and pulled out their phones. One woman screamed, "He didn't do anything! Stop recording!" An officer shouted, but the cameras kept rolling. The man's face stayed calm, even as they pushed his head down and handcuffed him. "I have my ID," he said. "It's in my front pocket. I'm a U.S. Army lieutenant." "Sure you are," one officer laughed. "You people always have some story." "I'm not lying," the man said quietly. "Just let me make one phone call." The oldest officer looked at him and laughed. "Go ahead, call your lawyer." The man didn't argue. He just nodded once. They put him in the back of the car. His hands were cuffed tight. The streetlights above flickered slightly. A storm was coming. Inside the car, the man was calm. He pulled out a phone from his chest pocket. He had slipped it in when they weren't looking. It was small, black, and unlike any normal phone. He pressed just one button. The screen lit up. He whispered one sentence. "Activate Protocol 7. Tell the general, I've been compromised." That was all. Then he ended the call. The officers didn't hear it. They were too busy laughing outside, thinking the arrest was over. But everything was about to change. Less than a minute later, the officers' radios began to crackle. Then, silence. No signal, no backup, no dispatch. One officer tapped his radio. "Dispatch? Hello? What's going on?" Static. He tried again. "This is Unit 23. We have a suspect in custody. Do you copy?" More static. Then, nothing. Another officer checked his phone. "Why is there no service?" Inside the police car, the man smiled for the first time. Suddenly, the sky above made a deep rumbling sound. Not thunder. It was something else. Something powerful. A black SUV sped past. The street corner. It didn't stop, but the police noticed it had no license plate. The air felt strange. The youngest officer walked to the back window of the police car and looked at the man. "Who the hell are you?" The man looked straight into his eyes. "I'm the man you shouldn't have touched," he said calmly. The officer stepped back, his hands shaking a little. Then the gas station lights turned off. The entire street went dark. No power, no sound, no movement, except for the man sitting inside the police car, waiting. The street was completely dark now. The gas station lights were out. The only sound was the soft wind blowing through the empty parking lot. Inside the police car, James Carter, still in his uniform, sat quietly with his hands cuffed. He wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. The 4 officers stood near their cars, confused. "What just happened?" one of them asked. "No power, no radio, no cell service," the older officer said. "This doesn't make sense." Then they heard it, a low hum in the distance, like a large engine, getting closer. A black SUV turned the corner, headlights off. It moved fast, but smooth, like it had done this many times before. The SUV stopped right in front of the station. Two men stepped out. They wore black suits, black gloves and small earpieces. Their faces were serious. They didn't look like local cops. They didn't speak right away. One of them walked straight to the police captain. "Where is Lieutenant James Carter?" The captain blinked. "Who?" "Lieutenant James Carter," the man said again. "Where is he?" The captain looked at the officers. The youngest one spoke. He's the guy we arrested." The man in the suit stared at him coldly. "You arrested him?" The second man in the suit opened a tablet and showed them something. A photo. It was James Carter in the same uniform, shaking hands with a U.S. general. Behind them, an American flag waved in the wind. Below the picture were the words, "Lieutenant James Carter, U.S. Special Forces Rescue Unit, Clearance Level Omega." The officers went pale. "Oh my God," one whispered. "He's real." The man in the suit looked back at the police captain. "You just arrested a national hero." Inside the car, James Carter looked straight ahead. Calm, quiet, focused. The SUV men opened the car door. One of them asked gently, "Lieutenant, are you okay?" James nodded. "I've been through worse." The officers watched in silence. They didn't know what to say. "Why didn't he tell us who he was?" one of them asked. James stood up slowly. "Would you have listened?" No one answered. One of the suit men looked at the captain. "You're lucky he made the call. If he hadn't, someone much bigger would be here right now, and none of you would be standing." "Why? What call?" the captain asked. The man replied, "Protocol 7, emergency code for compromised special officers. When that code is activated, our entire system stops to protect the soldier. Planes are grounded, bases go silent, satellites shift. You shut everything down in less than 5 minutes. That's how serious this is." The officers looked at each other in shock. "But he didn't resist," one said. "He was just calm." The man nodded. "Because he's trained not to panic, even under pressure, even when treated like a criminal." James looked at the officer who pushed his face into the ground. "You didn't see the uniform," James said. "You only saw my skin." The officer looked down. He had no words. The man in the suit stepped forward again. "You don't know who you just put in handcuffs. This man saved 22 American lives in Afghanistan. He rescued a senator's son from terrorists. He's the reason 5 Gold Star families got to see their children come home." One of the officers whispered. "I thought he was just another guy." James turned to him. "I am just another guy. And that's the problem." The parking lot stayed quiet. Then the suit man looked at James. "We'll take it from here, sir." James nodded. "I'd like to make one more stop before we go." The man raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" James looked toward the station. "The security camera inside." They all followed him inside. The cashier, still behind the counter, looked scared. James nodded to her gently. "It's okay." He pointed at the ceiling. "Camera's up there, right?" She nodded. The suit man walked over, unplugged the hard drive, and took it. "We'll need this for the report." The cashier spoke up. He was polite, respectful. "Didn't do anything wrong. I saw the whole thing." James gave her a soft smile. "Thank you." Outside, more cars were pulling up now. A military jeep. A black van. Quiet men and women in dark uniforms stepped out and began to take control. Police officers stepped back. It was no longer their scene. As James was guided into the SUV, one of the officers said, "What happens now?" The suit man looked at him and said just 5 words. "You better hope he forgives you." The door shut. The SUV drove away, leaving 4 stunned officers behind in the dark, not knowing that their lives would never be the same again. The black SUV drove through the silent city. Inside, James Carter sat in the back seat, hands resting on his lap. He looked out the window. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of thoughts. The man sitting next to him asked, "Lieutenant, are you sure you're okay?" James nodded. "I've been through worse, but this feels different." The man didn't speak after that. He understood. They drove for another 15 minutes until they reached a military airfield. A small private jet was waiting. As the SUV stopped, soldiers standing outside saluted James. One of them said, "Welcome back, sir." James stepped out. He looked at the jet, then back at the sky. A storm was building, but not the kind made of wind and rain. Something bigger was coming. Flashback. 5 years ago, Afghanistan. The desert sun was hot and harsh. A small U.S. base was under attack. Smoke filled the air. Soldiers ran for cover, calling for help. Inside a damaged tent, James Carter, younger but just as calm, was loading a weapon. His radio was full of screams. He took a breath and spoke into it. "This is Carter. I'm going in, alone if I have to." "No, wait!" someone shouted. "It's too dangerous!" But James didn't wait. He ran across open ground, bullets flying past him. He slid behind a broken truck and spotted 6 hostages tied inside a building. Guards surrounded them. James moved fast, silent, and smart. He disabled 2 enemies without a sound. Then he stormed the building and got everyone out. Alive. That was the day he earned the Silver Star. That was the day his secret career began. Back to present, airfield hangar. Inside a private room, James sat with a general, a man with gray hair, sharp eyes, and medals across his chest. The general leaned forward. "They didn't just arrest a soldier. They arrested a national asset. Do you want to press charges?" James shook his head. "No, that won't change anything." The general frowned. The next morning, every news channel showed the same image. Lieutenant James Carter standing at a podium. He wore his uniform. His medals shined under the lights, but his eyes were heavy. Not with fear, but with truth. Behind him was the American flag. In front of him, the world was watching. The reporters went silent as he stepped up to the microphone. He took a breath. "My name is James Carter. I am a U.S. Army lieutenant. I have served this country for 11 years. I have led missions no one speaks about. I've brought home people others left behind. I've been shot at, chased, and nearly killed, all to protect this flag." He paused. "But last night, I was treated like I was the enemy." The room stayed quiet. "I wore this uniform. I carried my ID. I spoke with respect. But still, I was thrown to the ground, handcuffed, treated like a criminal. Why?" He looked directly into the camera. "Because I am black." Gasps moved through the crowd. Reporters lowered their pens. Some looked down. James continued. "I made one phone call during the arrest. One call. Not to hurt those officers. Not to punish them. I made that call to protect myself. Because in that moment, even my uniform couldn't protect me from how they saw me." He looked at his hands. These hands have saved lives, pulled soldiers out of fire, carried children out of danger. But to those officers, they only saw threat. He pointed at the screen behind him. It showed a still image, him lying face down in handcuffs, his hat on the ground, his name badge shining in the light. This picture broke something inside me. He paused again, trying to stay calm. "I don't want revenge. I don't want pity. I want change. Somewhere else." The officers watch in silence. Back at the police station, the 4 officers sat in the break room, staring at the screen. James's speech echoed through the room. The youngest officer, Officer Miller, had his head in his hands. "Thought he was lying," he whispered. "I didn't even check his ID." The older officer clenched his jaw. "We failed. Not just him. Ourselves." Their captain stood at the door, arms crossed. "You all need to understand this is more than a mistake. This is a lesson the whole world is learning right now. And we're the example. Miller looked up, eyes red. Is he going to destroy us? The captain shook his head slowly. He could have, but he didn't. Back at the podium, the truth that stings, James kept speaking. I don't hate those men. I feel sorry for them, because their fear was louder than their training. Their eyes were too blind to see the truth. He looked down, then back up. But now the world sees. Now everyone sees. He stepped away from the mic. For a second, there was complete silence. Then the room erupted with applause. Not just polite clapping, real applause. Standing ovation. Across the country, soldiers, students, parents, and even officers watching from home stood up. They weren't just clapping for his words, they were clapping for his courage. That evening, the call that broke them later that evening, James made a private phone call. He called the police captain directly. The captain answered in a shaky voice. Lieutenant Carter? James spoke calmly. Yes. I'm calling to speak with your officers. All 4 of them. Together. The captain called them in. The officers stood nervously. None of them could look James in the eye. Then James spoke, his voice steady but heavy. I gave my life to protect this country, and you made me feel like I didn't belong to it. Silence. Then he added, but I'm not here to curse you. I'm here to make sure you never do this again. Officer Miller stepped forward. Sir, we're sorry. We didn't see you. We didn't want to see you. James replied, then open your eyes. From now on. Then came the words that none of them expected. I forgive you. All 4 officers went silent. One of them sat down, covering his face. Another whispered, why? Because anger burns, James said, but forgiveness builds. He paused, and the world is already on fire. It had been 3 days since James Carter's powerful speech. The world had changed. News stations kept playing clips of his words. Soldiers in different countries sent him messages of support. Even some of the officers who once stayed silent began to speak up. But James stayed quiet. He stayed home, alone. The world was watching him, cheering, praising, even calling him a hero. But deep inside, James felt something that no one could see. He felt invisible. A visit from an old friend. One evening, James sat in his kitchen, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. The house was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Colonel Davis, his old commanding officer, a man who had led James on his first mission. His face was older now, but his eyes still sharp. I figured you might not answer a call, the colonel said, smiling. James stepped aside. Come in, sir. They sat in the living room. The colonel looked around and said, You always liked peace more than noise. James chuckled softly. Noise is everywhere these days. Colonel Davis leaned forward. I watched your speech. I figured you did. You were brave, son. James looked away. People think I'm a hero now. But where was that belief before I got tackled to the ground? The colonel nodded slowly. You know, when I was young, I wore the uniform with pride. But I still had to prove who I was every single day, not as a soldier, but as a black man. James looked up. His voice was low. Why do we have to earn our humanity? The colonel gave a sad smile. Because some people only see skin, not sacrifice. Hidden wall of heroes, the colonel stood up. Come with me. There's something I want you to see. James hesitated, but followed. They drove across the city to a quiet building. It looked like an old library. Inside, the lights were low. The walls were covered with photos. Black and white. Pictures, uniforms, medals, names. James stepped closer. Private Charles D. White, Waiwi sniper, uncredited. Sergeant Linda Boone, Vietnam combat nurse, erased from records. Captain Jerome Gray, led rescue ops in Korea, forgotten. Who are these people? James asked softly. The colonel replied, Black soldiers who were never seen, never honored, never heard. James walked down the hallway, heart heavy. They gave everything, he whispered. The colonel placed a hand on his shoulder. And now, you're giving them a voice. Back at the station, officers reflect at the police station. The 4 officers who arrested James sat in training, but it wasn't normal training. James had created a new program. It was called The Uniform Doesn't Erase the Person. A speaker stood in front of the officers. She was a black woman, a former soldier, now a police chief. She looked at them with steady eyes. When you arrested James Carter, she said, you didn't just arrest a man, you silenced a story. One officer raised his hand. How do we fix this? She replied, you don't fix people, you change yourself. Then you teach others. The room went quiet. James's first real interview. Later that week, James sat across from a news anchor for his first full interview since the arrest. The anchor smiled and said, Lieutenant Carter, how does it feel to be called a national hero? James gave a tired smile. It feels strange. Strange? Why? Because being a hero shouldn't be the price to be treated with respect. The anchor nodded slowly. James continued. You know what hurts the most? It's not the bruises, not the headlines. It's the fact that I had to be dragged through the dirt before people finally saw me. The room was silent. Everyone watching could feel the weight of his words. He looked straight into the camera. To everyone out there who feels invisible, I see you. It had been 1 week since the arrest. 1 week since James Carter, a decorated black soldier, was handcuffed on a quiet street, in full uniform. But now, something was different. For the first time, people weren't just talking. They were listening. The government calls. James was sitting in his living room, reading letters sent by children from across the country. Most were drawings of him in uniform. One little girl wrote, Dear Mr. Carter, I want to be brave like you. Please don't stop being kind. Then, his phone rang. It was the Secretary of Defense. Lieutenant Carter, the voice said. The President would like to meet you. James froze. The President? Yes. Tomorrow morning. You'll be speaking at the National Leadership Summit. Millions will be watching. James said nothing for a moment, then finally answered, I'll be there. The summit. A nation watches the... Next morning, the hall was packed. Leaders from across the country sat in silence. Soldiers, teachers, police chiefs, and students filled every chair. On every TV, across every phone screen, people waited. James stepped up to the podium. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore his uniform. Again. But this time, it wasn't a target. It was a symbol. He looked at the crowd, then at the cameras. My name is James Carter. You know me now. But for years you didn't. His speech, quiet. Then loud, James paused. I didn't come here to talk about pain, he said. I came here to talk about truth. He held up a picture. The photo of him face down on the ground during his arrest. This was me, days ago, a soldier, treated like a criminal. Why? Because my skin spoke louder than my uniform. The room was silent. I've been trained to protect people. But no one trained me on how to protect myself from the people I protect. Some in the audience looked down. Others nodded, eyes wet. James's voice grew stronger. But I forgave the men who did this to me. Not because they deserved it, but because this country needs healing, not more hate. Applause started, slow, then louder. But forgiveness is not the end, he said. It's the beginning, and it only works if we also bring change. He looked at the president sitting in the front row. We need training that sees the person, not just the badge. It had been 3 months since the arrest. 3 months since James Carter stood in front of the world, not as a victim, but as a voice. His program, See Me, a human-first movement, had spread across the country. Police departments, military bases, schools, they all began to change. Slowly, yes, but truly. And yet James never stopped wearing his uniform. To him, it was more than clothes. It was a message. The final event, a new ceremony, on a bright morning in Washington, D.C., the city prepared for a special event. The government had built a new memorial, not for wars, not for battles, but for unseen heroes, soldiers of color who were forgotten, ignored, or erased from history. James Carter was the guest of honor. As he stepped onto the stage, thousands of people stood and clapped. Among them were veterans, officers, students, and families who had never heard their loved ones' names spoken in public until now. A giant screen behind James showed photos. Black nurses in Vietnam, Tuskegee Airmen in Wubby Hoot, brave soldiers. In Afghanistan, all of them. Finally seen. James's final speech. A promise to keep James took a deep breath. He looked out at the sea of faces. Some smiled, some cried, some just listened. He began. I once believed a uniform could protect me from everything. That if I worked hard enough, served long enough, obeyed every rule, I'd be safe. He paused. But I was wrong. He held up a folded piece of paper, the letter from the officer who had written to him months ago. This letter is from one of the men who arrested me. He said I helped him see. But the truth is, he helped me heal. The crowd was silent. James stepped forward. I forgave him, not to forget what happened, but to make sure it never happens again. He pointed to the memorial behind him. These names were once invisible. Now, they'll never be forgotten. Then he placed a medal, his own bronze star, at the base of the memorial. The crowd gasped. A reporter whispered, "He's giving up his medal?" But James turned to the crowd and said, I didn't earn this for myself. I earned it because of the ones who came before me, and the ones who were never thanked. Backstage. A surprise guest. After the ceremony, James walked behind the stage to catch his breath. He didn't expect what came next. Officer Miller, the youngest of the 4 men who had arrested him, was waiting there. No uniform, just regular clothes. He looked nervous, eyes wet, hands shaking. Lieutenant Carter, he said, voice cracking. James turned to face him, calm but curious. Miller stepped forward and pulled something from his pocket, his own police badge. I resigned, he said, not because I was fired, but because I want to start again. Clean. I'm going to train to become a community counselor. I want to help people. The right way. James looked at the badge, then at the man. Then slowly, he reached out and shook Miller's hand. Not as a soldier, not as a victim, but as a man, a legacy that lives. On the next week, news channels all over the world played clips from the memorial. The headlines read, "One uniform, one message. From arrested to admired, a soldier's stand for justice." James Carter's movement changes lives. But James didn't care about headlines. He went back to doing what he always did, serving quietly, speaking in schools, training new officers, helping young soldiers believe they mattered, even when the world told them otherwise. One day, a teacher asked him to speak at a school in a small town. When he arrived, the children stood up and began to clap, not because he was famous, but because they had read his story. A little boy raised his hand and asked, "Sir, what does your uniform mean?" James smiled. "It means I fight for people, even when they can't fight for me."